it would be great if we could have Kyler and Leslie together. That would be terrific. Kyler, do you want to start? You want to launch it?
I'd love to. Thanks, Allison. And thanks for the invite to be part of this panel today. So, a little bit about Warwick. We are an SEC regulated investment firm. So, as a disclaimer, we're not giving any investment advice. You can't say, well, Kyler said that, I should put my money here or there. That's not what this is about. So we'll get the legalese out of the way. But we are based in Oklahoma City. We have offices in Dallas, New York, and in Chicago, as well as in London. Currently, we have about $2.3 billion under management. We're a growing company. So when we say 75 or more, we really lean on the more part of the 75. We are a vertically integrated company that focuses on lots of transactions. We're kind of micro aggregation as well as buying and building larger assets. We started in 2010. We're founded by a lady named Kate Richard, who's absolutely amazing. Like I mentioned earlier, we are an SEC regulated investment firm. And that $2.3 billion is spread across mainly oil and gas and natural resources. So 2.1 out of the 2.3 is allocated to natural resources. We do have a $200 million asset base in real estate, predominantly in the UK. And, you'll see from the slides, we are a very structured company, and we have to be structured because we need to be vertically integrated. And what that means and how that's going to kind of color everything else that I talk about in terms of the GRI is, vertical integration, not just structurally, but also philosophically. And that's something that, and culturally, and that's something that GRI has been supremely beneficial in helping us with, especially with those last two. So with that, I'll hand it over to my colleague, Leslie.
Hi, Leslie Griffin. I'm the Director of Land for Warwick Investment Group. And I work solely on the energy side. So that would be hydrocarbons across two different U.S. basins that we primarily own and operate in. And I am fairly new to the organization. I started here about 4 months ago, and I found this tool to be incredibly helpful in understanding, number one, expectations for roles, since it's a different structure than I'm used to at larger companies, but also how my GRA matches with my peers and my direct supervisor and then my direct reports, just in terms of giving me like an initial insight into strengths and into ways to approach them to make sure we're the most efficient for the business. So I also really appreciate being included today and have really enjoyed my time with Allison. She's been so helpful, and just I love the tool. I've seen a lot of these tools, as you can imagine, working at really large Fortune 500 companies. And this one is so straightforward and easy to understand and to just immediately start deploying and utilizing. So that's what I mostly appreciate. And I'm looking forward to speaking about today with you all. So thanks again, Allison, for including Kyler and I.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. I'm based in Boston currently. I have some businesses and a home in Tennessee, and I also have businesses in California where I am today. So trying to navigate that has been fun. I apologize for my delay getting on the call. So I'm a business owner. I have a few businesses I own. The largest business we own is a childcare franchise business. We own about 14 centers across 3 different states, California, Massachusetts, and Tennessee. And we've been in this business about 6 years. I have a couple of business partners in this venture, and it's been a very fulfilling experience. We love this business. We have kids who are 6 weeks old all the way through 6 years old. And roughly we employ maybe about 400 employees or so across these businesses. And there's some fun times we get to see. There's some challenges, obviously, with every business you run. But the beauty is when you walk into these businesses, you see the little kids, you see them grow, you see them learn. They're full of energy, and that part is very fulfilling to us. If you move to the next slide, that's our newest venture, which is called Restore Hyperwellness. Also a franchise business, which is growing. We've been in this business just about 18 months, and we had to scale up from 0 to 8 locations in about 18 months, and it's been pretty challenging, including things such as construction, build out, making sure that these locations are fully staffed. And At this point, we're now focused on growing the business and making them profitable. So that's a little more about the business. If you move to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about one of my favorite slides I show people. I'm a consultant as well. I talk about process versus outcome. And I'm always talking about, well, most of the time, if you don't have a good process and you have a good outcome, you fall into the category known as dumb luck. And in the recruiting was the same for us. We found a few good people. We stumbled upon them. And a lot of times we had some not so good hires, but what we're recognizing is the importance of having the right tools, not just an interview process or not just a reference check or not just somebody's resume. Taking into account all these things is helping us. And we haven't fully cracked the nut yet. We're getting better at it. Every day we look at it, and when my business partner calls me and says, hey, I want to hire this person, the first question I ask him is, did they fill out a GRI? Let's look at their profile and see how they fit. And we learned that we created those position behavioral PBI surveys, which he and I took for every position, and we aligned on those. So we were off on a few things and we aligned, we talked about it. And we have recognized that over time, we want to refine those because our expectations of what we think should be in the job or the position has changed after 6 months, after seeing somebody in that job. So that is very critical, having that cadence of doing it regularly. The next couple of slides, I'll just talk about what we have with our organization and the challenges. So within the childcare business, we have 3 regions. Each region has a regional manager, and then there's locations underneath. Each location has a director and an assistant director. And roughly about 400 employees. It's been hard to source talent in certain markets, especially the Northeast for us. Massachusetts being really hard. And what we find amusing about this business is each of these locations is like a $2.5 million box, if you may. And it entirely depends upon how good the people running the business are at the head of the location. And keep in mind, these people who run these locations are not business people. They're teachers, they're educators who have grown in that organization. So helping them learn the business side and finding the right person, because the best teacher is not going to make the best manager and the best business person. So that has been some good learning here for us. The next slide talks about the Restore organization that we have. Again, there's 2 regions here, and every location has a general manager and an assistant manager. We're still learning this one. This has been a very tricky business for us. We have learned that although it's a wellness business, people with a people with a background from the gym or the fitness industry don't necessarily do very well because this is a concierge type of a business, very high in terms of customer service, making sure that clients are getting the kind of service and the treatments they want, and making sure that we cater to their needs. So we have learned really fast, and this was the business that pushed us to deploy GRI, which has been very helpful. I'll talk a little bit about how GRI fits into the grand scheme of things for us. So we made a lot of mistakes, some expensive, some not so expensive, but it takes time and effort. You bring people on board, you train them, and then you realize they're not the right fit. So that cost has been pretty high, and in this market where we have struggled to find good talent, it's actually come and that's hurt us a lot more. I personally was familiar with PI, DISC, GRI, etc., and talked to Frederic a couple of times, and we realized that there's something more here, that more technical, that we can learn and deploy this ourselves. So that's the reason why we went with GRI. What's interesting is I asked Frederic, can I fake the survey? Can I answer it incorrectly and see what the results come? And he said, well, it's very technical, but it's the best way to describe it is it's more about what you don't answer versus what you answer. And the answers you'll get, so it's been consistent. I've taken the test, I think 2 or 3 times. And the survey is spot on. It identifies my strengths. And my business partner too, we both have a very similar background. Education, our thought process and values are very aligned. Yet there are things that I know that he'll take a risk much faster than I will. And I'm more methodical and I'm more formal, I guess is the word I'm using, but more process driven. And he's less so. So our strengths play to each other, and we've learned to respect that as well. How do we use this? All hires who are managers or higher have to take the survey. We want to make sure that their results are being reviewed. And we actually have to fill out the forms ourselves, not just looking at the summary that the GRI tool spits out. We want to understand a little more the cofactors, the interactions, etc. And there's room to do more, of course. So what we have learned so far is obviously there's no good or bad results. You just need to understand what their relative fit to what you need. We want to spend time making sure that the PBI is accurate and refine it as needed. And the factor interaction is important. This was an odd observation we made, and so far it's been true for us. Candidates who have had a very low percent fit to the PBI rarely perform well on interviews for us. I don't understand what it is, but they haven't consistently. And on the flip side, people have had very high matches as well. Doesn't mean that we end up selecting them or that they're the right match for our business. I see Pat shaking her head there, so probably true for some of you. What we want to do in the future is spend some time developing profiles. The PBI is better. We want to make sure that we read and understand what every candidate comes in, not just send the survey 30 minutes before, and when they show up, you're kind of browsing through. That's a bad habit we've picked up, so we're going to try to change that. And using our managers to drive staffing and performance. That's what we want to do.
Fantastic. Thank you. I just want to make sure, what were your key takeaways from the seminar?
It's been a long time. It's been 15 years.
Okay. Sorry, never mind.
Yeah, maybe someone more recent than me. But I will say, when you first learn, it's really confusing. And it takes a while to get going. But once you, I always have every candidate read their GRI and confirm whether or not it's accurate. So that to me is really important. I was retaining at one point about a 99.7% accuracy rating, asking every single person. So for me, it was confidence. It was confidence that I had the right, behavioral pattern. I had the right person in the room. Then it became, do I like them? Did they like us? Did they like what we do? Are they good? Everything Kanady just said, they match, but now it's up to us to interview. But I guess the thing I took away was confidence.
Yeah. Elena, what about you? What did you take away from the seminar?
Yeah, it's been a couple years, but I thought that Frederick did a great job at the training. It was definitely confusing in the beginning, but I just overall, once I figured out how to read the graphs, I think it was just super valuable because I'm very impatient and I don't like to read a lot. Like I can't be stuck in these details. So just looking at a graph is just really very useful for a personality profile like mine. So.
Yeah, well, it is confusing because it's nuanced, right? Because we're not typing anyone in this system. So that's what makes it interesting, but it also makes it complex, which is not such a bad thing. Kyler, Leslie, when you were in different sessions, but I'm just wondering, what were your key takeaways from the
Sure, Allison. Leslie, I'll go first if that's all right with you. I want to build on what Patch said. She said confidence. One of the major takeaways that I had coming out of the seminar was clarity, right? Clarity in the fact, or by the definition, that I can articulate who and what I'm looking for, right? So often, sometimes we have this idea in our heads of the perfect role and the perfect candidate, and and sometimes they become the tooth fairy. So what differentiates, in my mind, one of the things that differentiates the GRI from other similar tools. Frankly, there are no similar tools, but it's the PBI. It helps actually manage the manager, and it forces you to communicate and to stop and think about what you're looking for, what kind of role you're trying to fill, what they want, what you want them to do, what kind of skills they need to have in order to perform those functions. And then you can go start looking for it. Now you have kind of a description of who it is that you're looking for. The PBI to me is kind of the mortar that, we're not just making bricks, we have to make the building, right? So otherwise we end up with just a pile of bricks.
Nice analogy. Leslie, did you want to add anything to that?
Kyler really hit the nail on the head. We work in such a multidisciplinary type industry where, maybe the thing I'm looking for as a person's direct manager isn't necessarily the same thing that their peer is looking for from like a geology or engineering perspective. And so one thing I've really appreciated is when we do the PBIs and we get together and we talk about it, I think Kunal referenced this earlier, you got with your business partner and you guys made sure you were aligned on what was important to make sure everybody's needs were met and the business was driven forward. And that's one thing as we continue to grow, like Kyler says, we focus on the 75 and more, right? As we continue to grow, how critically important that is to be aligned from the outset, so we can review candidates and, kind of start from a base of people that we feel like would automatically be a good fit. And then to Patch's comments, then it becomes, do we feel like they'd be a great coworker? Do they embody our core values? Those kind of things that you really can't just get just from the PBI itself. Or from the GRI itself. So I agree with Kyler. I think the PBI has been so important as we continue to grow and build out the organization.
Thanks. Kunal, did you want to add anything to that in terms of the seminar?
I actually echo what Kyler and Leslie said. It is important I love the analogy about the bricks. Just having bricks is of no value. And we're also ready to make a change when we realize that somebody is not fitting in. The ability to say, hey, this person doesn't have at the core, by default, they may not have the right skills. See if there's another role for them in the organization. If not, help them move on, but also start looking for replacements at the same time. We're still figuring out the PBI percent match. We haven't quite nailed it yet. I hesitate to say that 75 is a number that I want to go out. I aspire to be where Leslie is on that one.
Okay, thanks. So Patch, I'd like to just go back to your slides because I think we missed those earlier. And so I want to give you an opportunity to just talk a little bit further and take the floor. Thank you.
Great. Okay, next, please. Great. So I kind of landed in this job actually many, many years ago. I was a general manager of a construction company, and we turned it into a software company. We decided to sell energy efficiency software. And at the time we were venture backed. So I felt very lucky that we had the funds to figure out how to get the right people, because it's important that we had the right people. So that's it's not Recurve. That's the little house icon you saw there. So I learned about this, and like I said, haven't looked back. Oftentimes I'm brought in, especially at layoffs. Who do we keep? Who needs to go? Many times it's a small company that wants to get really big really quickly. I've got to go through an entire company at times and get into everybody at the GRI to figure out who's who. And so I work with HR. My division is called People Operations because it includes development and training of people, retention, bringing on, folks inside a company I call mentors, who kind of train somebody up in their department. But this allows us to physically see, and for those of you who haven't used the GRI, it's a graph. I always say it looks like an EKG, and I can see the pulse of the people. So without even meeting them, sometimes I can help the managers guess who's going to be best, the right person. I can't remember the author, the right person for every seat on the bus. Again, have worked for this for a long time. And I think it's important for me at this point to talk about recruiters, because many recruiters aren't given what I would say the power. Frederick likes to joke that I just kind of stepped in and ran it because I am a high one leader. So recruiters oftentimes are kind of given the last opportunity or the last bit of power to say, you find the people. Well, it's backwards in my consulting business and with the people I've worked for. I was like, I'm the one who decides. So it's usually very gentle, but if we get down to a few and someone's not the best match, their GRI really comes into play. And that's very important. So especially when we're, like Elena said earlier, so for some jobs, we're getting 200 candidates. How to get 200 down to 3. So that's what I do. 200, I send out about 40 GRIs. I go through all those people. I bring it down to 3. We interview 3. We hire 1. That process can take anywhere between 6 weeks and 6 months, depending on the role. But, again, the other piece of this that's important is that there are roles coming up right now, as you can see there, Web3, DeFi, cryptocurrency, AI. None of these things even existed a few years ago. How do you hire for a role that has never existed? Well, it's by getting the managers, the colleagues, the people who are going to be involved with this role involved in taking their survey. Quick little scenario, I went into a very large biotech firm. They were hiring a vice president of financial planning and analysis. The role had been open for almost a year. And I had them all take the GRI, and they had 6 different results. They never could have filled that role. So we drug them into a room and had them go down the list of what's most important. Someone's going to lose and someone's going to win. And so they finally all agreed, okay, I guess I'll let go of this in order to get these other things that I agree are more important. We went back in with something we had collaborated on, a good PBI, and we found someone in 3 months. She's amazing. She moved from Chicago to California, worked there for many years, and she's top notch. So again, it lets you see who you've got in the room and gives you confidence. I think that's my last slide.
Great. Thank you for this.
Sure.
Kyler and Leslie, no, let me just go to Elena first. I'm sorry. Elena, I can't get your name. Sorry about that.
That's okay. You wouldn't be the first. So no worries there. But yeah, did you want to share the slides that I prepared?
Yeah. Susan,
okay.
Would you like those?
Okay.
When you were talking about your impatience, I'm sure we all thought the same thing at the same time. Low 3.
Yeah. You'll see that. I have a little a slide on that as well. Okay, so this is my company. We've been doing this for a bit, and so this is a good management tool as far as like how to interact with each individual person, because I have found that my personality profile is way different than everybody else in the company. And so initially I was a little bummed out about that, but it turns out, you just can't change really who you are. So, it's just really just me using this as a tool to how to communicate better. And, just not make anyone, mad, I guess. So, so we can move to the next slide. And okay, so the top two, personality assessments it's done through another platform. And I've had to do it a couple times through a coaching group that we hire to coach our business for profitability. And this assessment, it takes 30 plus minutes to do. So what's great about this is if you really deep dive, if you know the GRI and the graph, right, it's literally yielding the same results. So it's saying that basically, I have a high factor 1, which the GRI is showing, more of a dominant type character. Sociability on the high side, which is basically what the other personality profiles are saying. Everything aligns, but I can get the same results with a 3-minute survey. So in my opinion, this is way easier. It's much more valuable to do, because I can't, spend $300 or $150 every time I'm thinking about hiring somebody in a small business like that. It's very, it becomes very costly, right? So GRI, you can send as many as you want out and you get the same exact results in 3 minutes. So in turn, really what we do with the GRI is I'm a little different than Patch. So I don't make every single, ultimately they are going to do the GRI. But if they fail to do it before they come in for an interview, if we've had a good conversation on the phone, I will still bring them in and just have them do it really quick in the office. And then I always talk to them about it. I don't have them read it. I just kind of ask them some questions. And 99% of people that we bring in are usually really, really surprised that we know them just by answering, the few questions they did just in our lobby. It also, I think, kind of allows us to build a really quick connection with the candidates. That, in HVAC, there's a lot of competition, and so if I'm able to build that connection with them right then on the spot, most likely they're going to come work with us as opposed to somebody else. And then the other thing that I want to talk about, for a company like ours, it's hiring, either labor positions, skilled tradesmen. It's difficult to get them to sit through a long 30-minute thing. They don't want to do that. They just want to do it really quick on their phone, and just kind of be done with it. So that's another benefit for that. And then I would also say that for the GRI, I've tested this with multiple candidates, and what I found is, especially for sales positions, Now I absolutely will never, ever deviate from the results of the GRI, like what I've deemed to be important. And I have deviated in the past and it just never works out. So I'm like a strong, firm, like believer in the GRI for sales positions. With other type of positions, I think that, it can, for like a labor position, you can kind of get different personalities sometimes. So it's not like black and white like a sales position would be. And then I do want to say as well, like during the training with Frederick, we had to give everyone in the company, like Patch said, the GRI. And we had two individuals on the team that just were like really, really not engaged. And during that, and I'm an open book, right? So I'll say, I had some bad apples, right? So Frederick was basically telling me, hey, these guys are probably not going to work out. Like you're going to need to, start thinking. And I was like, yeah, whatever. And in turn, he was correct. A few months later, they weren't working out, so we had to part ways. So it is very valuable, especially when you first onboard. And I would say if you have some kind of skepticism towards it, maybe just have a little bit more of an open mind and maybe learn from the mistakes that I've made. So there's that. And then also like when it comes to, managing the team, for example, like giving individuals recognition, the GRI will basically tell you, do they prefer to be given recognition individually, or do they like a public display? So it's really valuable as far as that goes, just to be able to adapt your method of delivery. Again, because if you look here on this graph, like my personality profile is way, way different than, this is just a small snapshot of our people. But so I always thought like, hey, like I can just do whatever I want and everybody, is going to accept the feedback the way that I would. But it's far from the truth. So it's honestly, it's helped me develop as a person, I think, as well. As a leader, as a person, really just overall, because I don't only use it and embarrassingly or whatever, like I've actually given the GRI to like my entire family on both sides, like my husband's and mine. So it's just kind of interesting to, just be like, and then I've read it back to them and they're like, man, like, how did you get that just off of like 2 minutes? So kind of interesting to do on like a family vacation, I guess. And then the other thing, like I said in the beginning is, it is a fixed cost. So I like that. You can budget for it. You don't have to be like, oh man, do I think this guy is going to be worth giving this behavior assessment to? Do I want to spend $150? Like it's already in your budget. You already do it. You can just do it to every single candidate. And that's pretty much, I guess, summarizes, our experience with the GRI.
Thank you. I was thinking one of the things that you said, you said quite a bit, but one of the things that I was hearing in what you said was this notion of how this can be a benefit, right? Like an employee benefit, this loyalty builder, right? Because we're just developing connections right off the bat. So I think that was that was really good. I loved hearing that. Kyler and Leslie, you didn't have an opportunity to share your deck, correct?
No, we did.
You did? Okay. Well,
yes.
I couldn't see it.
Did everybody see it?
Everybody but me. That's
everybody
perfect.
But you.
Yeah. So just what I'd like to do is I'd like to just open it up right now. You've all heard one another talk, and I'm wondering, is there anything that you'd like to add, ask, or prompt in terms of discussion amongst this group before we go further? Because there might be something that has come up that, that occurs to you that you're curious about.
So I'll go. I have a question for the group here. Given that you guys have probably done this a little more than me, what I'm finding is we have people in roles today, and they're similar roles, two people running two different locations. And the PBI that we created deviates on a couple aspects, such as the dominant factor. We want managers to be a little more dominant, maybe on the high side. We have a couple managers that are actually on the lower side, but they're really good managers. And I'm trying to figure out, how do you figure out where do you draw the line, and how do you create the right PBI metric for that? For especially take into account that factor, or patience or impatience, whichever one you want to take. How do you make sure that it is aligned correctly? And which is there one that is more important than the other?
Right. So what I hear in what your question is that you would maybe naturally assume that you'd like to have certain characteristics that would indicate like a high factor one and a low factor three perhaps, but that you also see that there's plenty of room for a low factor one, someone who's a little bit more collaborative, cooperative, integrates the team. That is so yeah. So is there a type? I would suggest not necessarily, right? There's other than, Elena, when you reference the fact that, you've got like a sales type that's really effective for your organization. I don't think it otherwise is necessary to, that it works that way, right? So, what has your experience been, Patch, since you've been working with it for so long and you've seen so many people?
Thanks, Allison. So Kunal, if I remember my training correctly, there's not really a particular shape for CEOs. And from the org chart that you shared, which was awesome to see your people, I'm like an org chart nerd. I'll never forget it now. They seem to be kind of little CEOs of their own stores or shops, or however you refer to them. So I would say give it some time. And you just, know that if you have meetings of them together, you'll probably have to put in place the step up, step back theory. So some will just want to talk all the time, and others you'll have to say, hey, now let's hear from Sally and Joe or whoever. So that would be done at your level, managing them. But I would say let it roll and keep some documentation, and that the proof's going to be in the pudding. If they do well over time, they'll figure that out.
I would also add to that different organizations need different things at different times, right? So while one location may be really up and running really well and have a really healthy staffing culture and everybody's aligned, you may be starting a new center, or you may have gotten one bad apple in there that caused like cultural issues. I think just being flexible more than anything with the needs of your organization and the needs of your staff, because being a manager or a mini CEO, like that person reports up through you, right? But then also is in charge of making sure the people that report to them are performing at their best. And so I often find that just being flexible in what we think that role needs to look like is so important, because what I may need from this role at this time may be vastly different than what I need from it a year from now, just depending on kind of where it is. And so I find it that should be an evergreen process in how we're assessing it, in my own opinion, from where we're at. So I just try to be really evergreen with it and try to appreciate that at different times, different things are needed.
If I can add one more thing, I would guess, Kunal, that when you're going to see challenges with someone who may not be as independent and a strong leader is when terminations come up or having to hold someone accountable. Sometimes that can be very hard for people who are really nice and they just want everything to work out. So that may be the most important time to pay attention.
Yeah.
You're speaking my language. I just had to part ways with somebody yesterday who was really nice guy, fantastic human being. And it was hard to do. I mean, terminating people is always hard, but he was not a good people leader in that regard. He couldn't make a decision to save his life.
Oh, yeah. Well, we have to just ensure them that, taking those kinds of risks are acceptable, right? And that's extremely important with the lower factor ones. Kunal, so, Mihai has a question for you, a statement rather to respond to your question. He says, it depends on how the profile of the team looks, what kind of leadership they need, and it depends on what the phase of the business is. In other words, if this is a startup phase, that's one thing. If this is fast growing, if this is established, if we want to kind of coast for a period of time. So, yeah. So I think that it's very similar to what Leslie said. In fact, I do see another question coming from Susan, and it's an interesting one. It's about has anyone experienced difficulty at the C-suite level in terms of like having someone there that just kind of didn't have the leadership that they could have used, right, to be on that team. And so, I'm just wondering if anyone has had that experience. Were they open to shifting in terms of their behaviors? If in fact that, if they had to adapt. And so, has anyone had that? Seen it? No?
Um, you know, I didn't use GRI at the last company I was at, but it was a time where the business was very unhealthy financially. And
Mm,
so, that requires the C suite to lean in very heavily to like rallying people and keeping people motivated. Or even just, senior VPs, you don't even have to be executive level. So I loved what Elena said earlier in that it builds a lot of self-awareness. So this tool, I think like we use it so much like outwardly facing, but if we use it inwardly facing on ourselves, I think like self-awareness is such a key to good leadership. And so I think like if somebody can be self-reflective utilizing it, they can be more effective in their role. So while didn't have the experience where they had this tool, but probably could have benefited from this tool to understand kind of how they were meshing or weren't meshing would have been really helpful. And I can say that, through like senior VP levels that I worked with, just understanding kind of the profiles of their team. So I loved your point earlier about it building some self-awareness for you and you leaning into that. I think that's like huge, like a huge, big kudos to you for utilizing the tool in that way, Elena.
yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would add to that, maybe at a higher level or maybe more of a meta level, the willingness to participate in the GRI is binary as well, right? If we're not willing to participate and we're not willing to be self-aware and we're not willing to get better and we already know it and I'm perfect and it's everybody else's fault, then it's probably a foregone conclusion.
Yeah, and I would say too as well, if you have multiple leaders in the company, I believe that part of being a good leader is, understanding, okay, well, hey, maybe this other leader is better for this specific situation. And then just kind of, it's okay. Like you take a step back because not everybody's gonna get along. So
Right. And so what I was hearing in what you just mentioned, Kyler, is this, and Ellen as well, is this idea of the fact that we can actually use the GRI for personal development, not just
Yes.
professional development, right? So it's helping us to create the self awareness. How are we showing up as a leader? How do we want to show up? What is required here? What is needed from others? For us. So we're taking responsibility. And after all, I mean, leadership is a choice. Management is different, right? But leadership, that's a choice. That's a whole different animal. So I just was curious about the idea of, you know, other intangible benefits. We talked about loyalty. We talked about personal development, creating self awareness. I'm just wondering, are there other intangible benefits that you have seen? Like adjusting expectations around roles or the person, that sort of thing.
What I've found so far is if there's somebody is missing a certain skill set, or let's say this person's not very timely on a certain task, we make sure that we assign that task or partner up somebody with them to use that strength that they may not have and still be successful on a initiative. Whether it is so if we have some folks who are really good with clients and they're very sociable, but on the other side, if I put them into a solo project, they're not going to be as productive or as excited to do it. So finding the right balance and assigning tasks based on that has been somewhat helpful. We haven't done it a whole lot, but a couple of times we recognize it early on.
It's a great idea. Thank you.
I think it demonstrates, back to your comment on leadership, it demonstrates the importance to know your people. So to Kunal's point, like part of being a leader is understanding your team and their needs. And this is just a great intangible way to quickly do that initially. so that you can dig a little deeper and have a better starting spot. So I just love the fact that it helps you lean into knowing your people, their motivators, the things they're not as good at, those kind of things just initially, to kind of give you a head start. So you don't have to like work for 6 months to try to figure those things out. It's just a really nice starting place. And again, like I think you said, you're not boxing people in. It's just a nice segue into kind of having some real insights about people.
Yeah, and it helps you hit the ground running, is what I'm hearing. Yeah.
I'll add to that. For real small companies, and I've started some as small as 3 people, once you build up and you've got, say, 15, even 20 people, if you're doing really well, as many of them have, they're doubling and tripling every year, you can look at the GRI charts and figure out, say you want a subject matter expert on a certain chemical or something. You can tell the ones who could just take it on their own, who may start out at a lower rung and end up moving up, become a director, maybe even take a whole department. But you can see them, kind of like Ella does. They're really obvious. So, yeah, you can find the rock stars pretty easily.
Yeah, if I could add, the intangible, kind of the dark magic of buy-in, right? Everybody wants buy-in, right? There's nobody. I mean, unless you're kind of a megalomaniac or egocentric, and if that's you, then you're not interested in the GRI. So that's a moot point. But how to create buy-in, right? And for Warwick specifically, being started in 2010 and growing pretty steadily, and then experiencing a pretty significant growth period over the last 3 or 4 years, most pointedly over the last 12 months. It's important, that growth can be very scary because, you're looking into the future. That's kind of an unknown, but at the same time, where you've been, and there's some nostalgia with that as well. And you don't want to lose who you've become, or at least who you were. And so creating that buy-in, now it's easier to create buy-in when there are 8 people at the table. It's very daunting. Let's be kind and say daunting to create the same level of buy-in across 75 or more people. Okay. So that intangible of buy-in, the GRI becomes a language, really.
Right.
It becomes
common language, right?
Yeah, it becomes this common language that we have this idea in our heads, and we've all had the experience of trying to paint that picture into reality, and there's a ton that got lost between here and into reality. And so GRI kind of becomes the paint of how we paint that picture. So without having buy-in, your meetings get longer because you have to talk about the same things over and over again and make sure that everybody's still on the same page and everybody feels heard. But when you have buy-in and you have that team dynamic and that collective identity, right? Execution becomes a lot more streamlined. Planning becomes easier. You don't have to become the taskmaster to bring accountability. Accountability becomes almost a byproduct of that buy-in, right? And you become accountable to your partners, not just to your manager. So, like I said, kind of the black magic of creating buy-in. We know companies who've been very, very good at that across thousands, tens of thousands of employees, and the GRI helps articulate, that those kind of connection points.
Yeah, I think you're really onto something. It helps with this common language, but we're not saying you are something, right? We're not pigeonholing people, and that is what's extremely important, because we know we all adapt and we behave based on what our external influences are, how we feel that morning, who we're working with, the project we're working on, right? All of that really matters, right? So the idea is we use this as a great way to predict how someone might make a decision, how they might lead and all that, but we leave it completely open as well. So this is actually, if I think about an intangible, I think it's creating kind of a sense of open-mindedness around the possibility of the individual. And I think that's really important. There was a question that came through from Jean-Michel, and it keep the hold on a second. It keeps popping back up. I can't get it to stabilize, but it was basically the concept is, you know, and it's basically for Elena, knowing your extreme behavior, right? Like your predictable pattern, like how you're going to show up. Um, you know, how is it that you communicated that to your people? Like, you know, what did that look like exactly? And how did they react?
Um, to be honest, I never told them. So, but I changed the way that I am, when I interact with them. So, and the main reason why is because, first of all, like, it's just a graph, like, they don't know what it is, but and generally what I find is, people, all of my people anyway, they care about themselves. They don't care about, so much, maybe what others might be like. So, yeah, I don't think I communicated that specifically to them, but, I mean, I have, mentioned it like, hey, like, guys, like, I'm a lot different than most of you. So, and
Well,
just
yeah,
whenever trying to relate to them, some information or anything, I just try to, you know, put it in a different perspective, I guess. So,
right. Yeah. Well, but it does work both ways, doesn't it? I mean, you know, we can make our adjustments on our end, but it's nice to say, hey, here's how I show up. So if I'm
right.
frustrating you or I'm,
Yeah.
this is generally what you
Yeah.
can predict and
Yeah,
predict.
absolutely. And to be honest, I mean, so this is really like just kind of how I am. But honestly, like, I have developed over the years, doing what I do, like, quite a bit of self control now. So, even though that's what I want to be like, it's not always how I am. So Patch can probably attest to that a little bit. So, um,
So, we one of the when we talk about the factors and the numbers, I'm changing the subject. What we're talking about a high one, a low three. Now we know this work, and so how do we actually communicate that with others if we don't want to pigeonhole them? You know, if we don't want to say, oh, this is your type or who you are, right? I'm wondering, Patch, would you like to start? I'd love to hear how you express that to
Mhm.
folks. Thank
Sure, sure. I so I'm going to go down the numbers that we know, and I
you.
explain often to them what's going on. I spend a lot of time in these interviews, especially if it's for a managerial or a higher level. I kind of balance the top as a team player, and someone who likes to be more independent and autonomous. And we really want to get into asking them. I see that you prefer working with the team. Is that true? Yes. Or someone I see you like leading. You can probably take this on your own. Is that true? Yes. Or you get someone who's a super, super high one, and I say, you probably work well alone, don't you? Yes, yes. So you ask the questions to make sure. Second down, I start discussing if they consider their thought process more of one that's thinking or talking. So to someone who's in sales, I say, well, when you have a bright idea, do you usually bounce questions off somebody else and work it through? They're like, oh yeah, got to do that. The other being also true, my partner, when he needs to think about a solution, he gets on the sailboat and takes off by himself. And he comes back with an answer. So it depends on that too. So thinker, talker. Next one is patience or ability to just get down and go, like Elena, like myself. We're just like fast, multitasking, moving all the time, The other is if I'm going to hire someone who's like in AP, AR, or in the field, if they're installing the same thing over and over in solar, the solar legs are called stanchions. You have to put in 1 million stanchions in a big field. You need someone who likes repetitive.
Right.
And so we used to sing the song, I'm working on the railroad, because boom, boom, boom. Yeah, they like doing that. It's 11:15 and the horn blows and woo, time to take a break. And 15 minutes later, they go back. They love the routine. So for jobs that love routine, it's brilliant to see that little dot there on the
Yeah.
patience and routine. And the last one being someone who's more of a concept and idea person, a futurist, which I consider myself someone who's really out there. I'm always 15 years too early for everything I've ever done. Then the last one is detail. graphic designers, people in accounting, many jobs are high detail. So the ones that are low detail, high concept are usually folks who are starting businesses, they're entrepreneurs, they're visionaries, they're professors, they're spiritual leaders. So, I guess in casual terms, there's easy ways to discuss each of these numbers.
Yeah, that was really helpful. Thank you. So has anyone used this when we talked about intangibles? Conflict just costs organizations a fortune. I mean, it costs so much in productivity. And I'm wondering, has anyone used this, in terms of the comparisons or anything as it relates to conflict resolution? And how has that worked out for you?
I think upon hiring, and I've even had this feedback from our production team where they've come to us and they're like, hey, it just seems like we're just getting a lot better people. Everyone's really getting along now. So that has been really helpful. If a production person's personality profile is like way outside, so let's say they have my personality profile, I'm not gonna hire them. They have to be kind of somewhat matching, with everybody else, because I want them to be harmonious and to get along and, really want to even hang out outside of work, so they say that, most people stick around if they build friendships at their workplace. Right. So I think that has been really helpful for us.
Mm-hmm. So it's like, it's difficult though to balance because you want diversity in your organization. However, right, you've got to think about, okay, well, what kind of diversity? What do we want this to look like? Yeah.
Right.
Kyler, do you have any input on the conflict resolution work?
Yes. Conflict happens, right? And I think it'd be foolhardy of any kind of system or tool to say that it won't. So I'll give you a good example. Elena, I think you're the only person I've met that has a higher one than I do. So
true.
Kudos. It's true. I was saying, yeah, it's true.
I was looking at that.
So I'll give you a real world example. I needed to talk about some tough things with someone who was a very low 1 and an extremely high 4 and a very low 2. Okay. And so knowing that, I also knew that if this were to be a productive conversation, I almost said if I were to get what I wanted, but there's my high 1 showing. But if this were to be a productive conversation, I must show up expecting that this was going to go much slower than I wanted it to, that I was going to have to be very mindful and very present and very thoughtful. And this wasn't going to be an intense discussion that lasts for 5 minutes, right? And we hug it out at the end. That there was probably going to have to be a follow-up to this because the other person needed time to think and time to process and then time to come back. And even from a structural standpoint, I knew that and I had the agenda written out on my notebook, that I had to leave time. I had to be very mindful of how much I was talking, and also leave time for the other person to even sit there in very awkward silence, right? That doesn't mean that it's wrong, and it doesn't mean that he or she was shutting down. But the greatest risk to this conversation was going to be me pushing them off the ball to where they did clam up. And they just kind of took it in the side. They just took the torpedo to the side, and hopefully they didn't sink. Okay, Allison, did that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And Jean-Michel had a question or wanted to say something, which is, Kyler, you said earlier that you wouldn't be advising any financial investment. That's fair, but would you recommend to this audience invest in deploying the GRI within their company? And if so, have you ever calculated the return on investment of the GRI solution in your firm?
Allison, you cut out there for about 10 seconds. Can you tell me that again? I caught the return on investment. I caught the hard part. Can you give me the easy part?
Yeah, it's in the chat. And it says, basically, you said earlier that you wouldn't be making any financial investment advice, but basically, have you calculated the return on investment of the GRI within Warwick? That's the question.
I haven't done that specifically, but what I will tell you is, if you look at one of the quantifiable measures of kind of efficiency of what GRI brings to the table, I have seen it the most in meeting time. Okay, in meeting time. If you look at a team's calendar, right? You go, if you're Outlook and you invite everybody that you would want to talk to, and you go scheduling assistant, and you see, more often than not, you see how busy everybody is, and they're sitting in meetings, but all the while, that work needs to be done, right? So what that is usually an indicator of, and what I've seen the GRI specifically help with, is less time in meetings. And the reason for that is because we have that buy-in that I was talking about, because we have more streamlined communication, because we don't have to say the same thing 4 or 5 times, because we don't have to spend the first 30 minutes going through the apologetics of the project. Everybody knows, and everybody knows that they have a place at the table. That's the amazing thing, is when everybody gets to a spot where they are A, comfortable at the table, and B, accountable and glad to be accountable to each other, right? That's where you have that team dynamic. And, it's like everybody is playing an instrument, right? We don't ask a violinist to play the cello. No, please play the violinist, but here's the music we all need to play. And when we start harmonizing alongside that, and we're playing our instrument to the best of our ability, instead of trying to play the tuba. No, I'm a cellist, so I know what my part is, and then we can start playing the music. So this would be an interesting thought exercise. I would start looking at, the amount of time in meetings prior to the implementation of GRI, at least at a team level, and then after the team meetings, scheduling out of the team after the implementation of the GRI. I think that's a pretty good measure of efficiency and communication and team building.
That's interesting, thinking about it in terms of meetings. Yeah, Kunal, what do you think about that? Have you calculated the return on investment, of the GRI solution in your firm? I mean, what might that look like?
So similar to Kyler, we've not really put a number behind it to say here's the dollar value impact, but I actually think the benefit of this speed and time has been phenomenal, because we've had people in the organization who we kind of sense that something's not right with this person. They're not delivering the right results. They're not able to complete these things. And you can look at location 1 and location 2 and say, yeah, there's a problem here, but you can zero in on the problem by looking at somebody's profile and their default style. And we've been able to get people out of the, I guess, Pat said earlier, right seat on the right seat, trying to get them out of that role if they're not the right fit for that. That's definitely helped us. And the other piece, which I am subconsciously doing it, I didn't realize this until someone mentioned it earlier, is how you approach somebody who has a certain profile, and how do you align with them on something. You may have to take a slightly different approach, a listening approach, or share and come back later approach, versus trying to get it finished right away. And I'm highly impatient myself, so it takes a lot of work. And I think the GRI, using it on your team and people around you, is as much about being self-aware, and that it's a constant reminder to say, hey, just because you're wired this way, not everyone else is, and it's okay to be different. Being able to accept the differences and work through that.
That's right.
Allison, if I can add to Kyler's comment about behaving differently in meetings, I've even gone to the extent of sending them the material in advance so they can think about it and set it up. So if I write it out, I give a big space, and they can basically just print it and write their notes underneath. Some people think it's not like cheating. This is what we want to talk about anyway. But for someone who it takes a long time to process and to come, especially if it's bad news, they're going to be able to receive it, feel it, be like, oh, I'm not cutting it. And then to think thoroughly. And if this works really great when you're putting someone on a PIP, on a performance improvement plan, especially if you really want to keep them, but they just, failed. They missed their budget. They missed their bonus time, this, whatever. Just letting them know, we really want you here, but you've got to move through it. So for the folks who are thinker types, it's really nice to give them some time to process in advance.
Yeah, thank you. Elena, is there anything more that you want to add to that conversation?
No, I would agree with Patch. I think that's, but I've never sent them that in advance. I think that's an interesting approach. Might want to try that. So thanks for the tip.
Yeah, thank you. So is there, I'm just going to open it back up just for a moment to this group. When I think about the investment of time and energy on the upfront side, using the GRI, I'm just wondering, that seems to very often be people's concerns, right? They just want to jump to the end. They just want the results. And, this is a process, right? It's a thought process. And so I'm just wondering, what your experience has been with that in terms of having others in your organization, taking the seminar, and also, just any pushback that you maybe have gotten over time, and actually the results that you're seeing as a result, or seeing that it has yielded. So yeah, that just occurs to me. And Kunal, would you like to start with that? You've got a grin on your face.
Allison, you kind of are frozen.
Oh no. Kunal, did you hear what I said?
You're still frozen. No? There you are.
Okay. Kunal,
Leslie, I'm glad you're on there. You're the one I wanted to hear from. What has your experience been with that?
I'm sorry, I couldn't finish her thought. I didn't hear her finish of her thought.
Okay.
What could you help Patch? Could you kind of help give me some context if you heard it?
Because what I think I'm hearing is that some folks are concerned that it takes a while to learn the GRI, and what's the feedback of that? And I'm giggling because I'm.
Okay. So
I'm giggling.
Is, what was your experience? Because it's a lot of upfront time. It's a lot of, there's an expense associated with it. It's not a huge expense, but it takes quite a bit to put the GRI in your organization. And I'm just curious, on the other end of this now, where you all are, I'm wondering how that feels at this point, so like, I don't know. I just think sometimes we get a lot of pushback, like, here's another system, here's something else we've got to do. So that's what I'm going after. Just trying to get a little bit more insight.
I honestly don't know that I'm the right person to answer that, because when I came in, we were utilizing it, right? So I almost feel like Kyler would have a better perspective from his standpoint at Warwick, given that he's been here much longer than me and kind of went through this. I will say, like, what I appreciate so much is it does take a lot of time, but having Allison be there with us and devoted to spending the time, and she kind of let us lead the conversation in our training around like how we wanted to be able to leverage it best in our organization, which I appreciated. But I won't have a reference point for before and after, because this is what we were utilizing when I came in. So Kyler, I don't know if you would probably give a more robust answer to that from Warwick's perspective.
Sure. The implementation and the kind of upfront cost, time investment, let's put it that way. We were talking about return on investment earlier. It's not as great as you'd think it is, right? That's one. Two is it is extremely efficient. The seminars are very, very efficient. The consultants, at least Allison in this case, is absolutely fantastic operating within the framework of the GRI. Three is so that's the investment. Let's talk about the return. It's not a long dated return. It's not years, it's days. And it's days in two ways. And this is what I appreciate most about the GRI. I say most. One of the things I appreciate most about the GRI. And that is, it's really a double-edged sword. Okay. We've talked about We've talked about how it improves team building, but we've also talked about how it improves professional and even maybe personal growth. Okay, so the byproduct, and it's almost immediate after that seminar and after the initial implementation. The byproduct is you almost immediately know your business better. That's important to know. By doing the PBIs and having to stop and think and having to stop and discuss and having to stop, even at a leadership level, you immediately know your business better than you did before you went into it. That's very clear, and once you go through it, you'll see that there's no arguing that fact. And then that's in the immediate term, and then within a few weeks, your teams get immediately better. They immediately start operating at a higher efficiency level, and you immediately become a better, at least manager, if not leader. So I would challenge a little bit the idea. I understand that we don't want to put a lot of time into something without making sure that the investment is going to be yield high favorable results. But I would add to that the yield and the results and the impact is immediate, and I mean that it happens at the table. So you very quickly get past. I wish we, am I going to be glad that we did this? You get past that point at the seminar.
Good.
Yeah, and I just want to chime in just real quick on the ROI thing. For any organization really that has any sort of sales staff like this, the ROI is pretty much immediate, because you'll be able to know very quickly. I mean, the cost of a bad hire. You will do an interview with somebody, and I mean, sometimes they can trick you. So it's just nice having the graph to go off of. And I think immediately, if you're in sales, like this is, it's just a non-negotiable on that. So
I'll admit that the ROI was a little hard for us to understand why we needed to invest this much time. And I'm like, give me the answer, Frederick, give me the answer. I want to know how to do this. I don't want to waste time doing this. But It was important to do the homework. That was one part where the newer formats, they're very efficient, but you get what you give into the training as well. You have to do the homework. You have to read up. You want to be curious about it. And my business partner did the same training with me at the same time. And Frederick will say he was probably slightly less engaged than me. He understands stuff. He picks up stuff fast, but wasn't as engaged initially. And now he calls me about stuff. Hey, how do you do this in the platform? What does this mean? Can you take a look at this candidate? And I recognize that I'd put in just a little more time and effort than him. So I think it's valuable to do it. I encourage people to do it. While you may not understand the benefit, the more GRI surveys that you read and the more number of people that take the test on your team for your hires or existing teams, and you learn to read them, it helps understand how people are wired and how they're likely going to perform. It's not 100%, but it's a much better indicator than your gut instinct. And based off an interview, which Elena is right, people trick you. They're going to show up in their best version, and sometimes that's not reality.
So if you were to go out there and tell your friends or colleagues, right, in one phrase, couple of sentences, hey, this is what GRI is, what would you say about that? What elevator pitch would you use? Patch, I know Patch knows the answer to this. She's got it.
I'm trying to let these guys go.
I know. I see everyone thinking.
I say it's a tool that matches natural workplace behavior to every role in your company.
Nice.
That's it.
Like it.
Somebody else?
I was going to say the defaults, it helps identify what they would do in their default style. When they're under pressure, how would they operate? Because a lot of times people put on a mask and they can operate like me, for instance, I'm highly analytical. If you put me in a social environment, yeah, I can be social. I can spend an hour, I can spend two, I can spend 2.5, maybe 3 hours. But if you put me in a role that I am going to be social all day long, every day, I am mentally and physically exhausted at it. And I've seen this happen to me. So I know I can do some things. So people can flex their styles. You can adapt a little. The question is how much adaptation is required by that position that they need to be in, and how are they going to react in it? That's be the key for me.
I would say I think it's a tool that provides key insights to help your organization be the most efficient and productive that it can be. Again, because our organization didn't start with this tool, right? We adapted it later on as we're continuing to grow. And so, we had people in certain positions and we had a structure corporately. And so it just provided for me coming in, as the team was kind of already built out in a lot of ways, a lot of just key insights very early on. And so, and I think it's made my transition into the company much more efficient because of that. And so I really view it as an efficiency tool, but also a neutralizer, right? I didn't make assumptions about people. They didn't make assumptions about me. It provided us like a really nice place to start with a base level understanding. So that way that, people assumed positive intent both ways. And it took like a personal affront out of it, if that makes sense. So I really appreciate that about the tool. Is I think it kind of is like a ground setter in a way.
Yeah, because we're not talking about the person, we're talking about the behaviors, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Kyler, did you want to say something?
No, because I hate being
Not the
put in a
phrase.
box and say you've got an elevator pitch, but um, but
Because it would require brevity. That's why.
agreed. The GRI is an alignment tool. It helps align everyone from the most recent hire to the most tenured person around the company's culture and core values.
Whoa, nice. Thank you. So the last question we have for you is, what could we do better as an organization? What could this system give you that it currently is not? So what can we do more of, or what can we do better?
I'll go first since I'm probably the newbie there. Maybe I did my training last, so
Yeah.
I think the training's fantastic. The tool is actually really, really very user friendly, and if you know how to use it, you can get the most out of it. I think after the training's done, for deployment, giving a little more support to the key users in the organization who are going to use the tool to say, hey, how are you doing with this? Let's do an assessment and see how you're using the tool. Have you considered this? Have you taken it to the next step of using the grid format and evaluating your teams? How are your hires gone? Talk to us about that. So let's see who you hired. Let's see who you turned down. What did you learn? That would actually allow us, and it doesn't have to be long. It can be a 30-minute check-in or an hour check-in every couple months for the first 6 to 8 months, so you know that the tool was deployed to the best it could be and the users are utilizing it correctly.
Thank you. Great input. Elena, did you have anything that you'd like to share?
I mean, if you want to ask like how you could do more, I would say just maybe add an abilities survey onto that. So I know that this is meant for natural behavior profile, but there are times where I have to use another tool that has that. So it'd be nice to have a one-stop shop.
What kind of abilities?
Skills, really. So mathematical, working with shapes, and working with words, I would say, are probably the main three that
Great.
I'd be interested in.
Great. Nice feedback. Hutch, how about you?
Two things. First, I've often thought that GRI would be nice if they had a paid coach. There's someone had a 1-800-GRI, whatever they call in, and they're like, I'm stuck. What do I do? Because for newbies, I mean, it's nice, or maybe even a users group that might do it as well. I'm a big Linux open source person, so that might be helpful. But then, of course, you guys don't get to control what's being said there, nonetheless. So a 1-800 call in to the specialist who can help you. The other thing is templates. I write all my own templates for every company differently. So the announcement that says, hey, this is from this kind of company, this is what it is. I link to your organization. I put in all the facts about it being non-biased, which is really important in California since we have the non-gendered bathrooms and all that kind of stuff here, and that's going to be everywhere. So that's important. Another thing is putting in the pronoun they, because we only have she and he so far. I get asked about that a lot. Like, can they take it without using a gender? So I think that's it. Helping with the templates, adding a third or non-gender, and maybe finding someone who could be a mentor that folks can call, or creating a user group. I guess that's 4 things.
Love it. Thank you. Okay. By the way, we already have the non-binary gender. Yeah. Anything more as we wrap up? Okay. So thank you so much for this time. And I'm going to close the meeting out. I'd love to close out with just any takeaways or one word close, anything to just close our circle and our time together. Leslie, I'm starting with you.
I would just say thanks. I really appreciate everybody's comments today. I took something away from everybody. And Patch, to your comment, maybe to Allison's chagrin, she kind of has been my coach. I probably ask her too much or write to her too much. So maybe she's like, I feel like I'm doing that and Leslie shouldn't be, but I don't know. So just thank you to everybody for your time and insights and honesty today. I really enjoyed it and learned a lot. So thank you so much.
So valuable. Thank you. And Elena?
One word? I think that's kind of difficult.
You can say it. I was just I was making it easy.
Yeah, no, I feel like I learned that I need to work on my PBIs because I have those, but not for every role. And then I have some, kind of people in incorrect buckets. So I need to figure out how to put them in the right buckets and right positions, really. And that's all just user error. So, I'm going to go back and get to work, go from there. Nice. So it's been helpful.
Great. Kunal?
I appreciated the insight from people who've been using this for a longer period of time, and more practice, it'll come. I'm waiting to see what these results look like a year from now for us. But I'm just grateful for the community, and I love the idea of having a little more community approach where we can reach out to each other and say, hey, I'm struggling with this, or I have this question. How do I do this? And I know Frederick's enabled a lot of that. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Kyler?
One word, there's that brevity thing. Renewed. I've really appreciated being on the panel and also, to Kunal's point, engaging, interfacing with other people who are using the same platform and hearing their insights, hearing their results, and makes me frankly want to learn more and to do all that I can to kind of deepen the implementation of GRI into Warwick Investment Group.
Nice. Thank you. And Patch?
My word is early. And by that, I mean, do the survey early. For roles where you want someone to stay a year or more, which in construction, that can be a long time. But so do it early on. You can always, it really helps. So that's it.
Grateful for your time. I know that you can't get time back. It's not a renewable energy stream. So we really appreciate your wisdom and your support and the discussion. So thanks so much.